from a lack of food and have been displaced from their homes.
In a series of reports, Al Jazeera examines how soaring fuel costs and rising commodity prices due to the Iran conflict are affecting an already dire situation. Somalia's deepening crisis. Special coverage on Al Jazeera.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces
to prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza. The same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post.
Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
On Counting the Cost, a surprise from China. Its economy grew faster than expected at the start of the year, despite the Iran war. But is Beijing really holding firm? And is it emerging as a stable global economic player, or are cracks starting to show? Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera.
I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our extensive coverage of developments out of Iran, the U.S. and Lebanon. Iran attacks and seizes ships in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for the world's energy supplies. This after U.S. President Donald Trump extended a ceasefire with Iran just hours before it was set to expire, but talks remained in limbo. Also ahead,
we can't drive any further, it's dangerous.
Also ahead,
we can't drive any further, it's dangerous, because according to that map, beyond this point falls within the yellow line zone. Israeli troops are a few kilometers from here, mainly in border villages.
Empty streets, empty homes. We report from the edge of Lebanon's so-called yellow zone, where the only sound is the buzz of Israeli drones. The rising price of war, flight cancellations, and skyrocketing jet fuel costs are set to top the agenda at an EU summit in Cyprus. Plus,
it's hot, dry, and thousands of people are arriving in camps for the displaced in Kismayo in southern Somalia. I'll tell you their story.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has seized 2 cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Tasnim news agency says the IRGC Navy seized the Panamanian-flagged MSC Francesca and the Liberian-flagged Epaminondas off the coast of Iran near Sirik. This map shows their interception and escort into Iranian territorial waters. Iran accuses the vessels of operating without authorization and manipulating navigation systems.
These vessels have been transferred to the territorial waters of the Islamic Republic of Iran for inspection of their cargo and documents. The IRGC Navy once again emphasized that any action aimed at disrupting the implementation of the laws announced by the Islamic Republic of Iran regarding transit in the Strait of Hormuz, as well as activities contrary to safe passage in this strategic waterway, will be continuously monitored by the IRGC Navy, and violators will face decisive and lawful action.
The Strait of Hormuz has become a major barrier for diplomatic efforts toward a peace deal between the U.S. and Iran. A 2-week ceasefire has been extended to give the two sides more time to talk. President Donald Trump says Pakistan asked the U.S. to hold off attacking Iran to give Tehran time to submit a unified proposal. It comes after an attempt to renew talks in Islamabad this week failed. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations says they will participate in negotiations again as soon as the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports is ended. But Washington is defiant, saying the naval blockade of ports will continue. In recent days, U.S. forces have also intercepted ships in the strait. President Trump says the military will keep operating in the waterway until a deal is done. We have correspondents in Islamabad, Dubai, the White House, and Tehran. Let's start with Ali Hashim in the Iranian capital. Ali, the ceasefire has been extended, but Iran has now seized 2 ships. What's the overall messaging coming from Iran at this juncture?
Well, it's clear that Iran is separating the 2 issues. For now, we don't have a clear stance from Iran regarding the ceasefire, but we have a clear stance from Iran regarding the blockade, what the United States is saying is going to continue for till there's a deal. The foreign minister yesterday, Abbas Araghchi, issued a tweet saying that Iran knows how to defend itself and how to defend its sovereignty. He said several things in this regard. Then we heard from the IRGC and from the armed forces. So there have been several stances and positions in this regard. Then today we saw this operation, and it's clear that this is becoming a situation of tit for tat, a retaliation to the United States seizing an Iranian ship a few days ago, and even yesterday redirecting an Iranian ship back to Iranian waters. Despite the fact that over the past 24 hours, there have been several ships and vessels that crossed through the Strait and the Sea of Oman. But today's incident just emphasizes how much the situation is fragile and how much this ceasefire, for any reason, could collapse.
Mr. Trump unilaterally extended the ceasefire, while until just a couple of hours before he said, I wouldn't extend it, and I'd do this and that. He falsely claimed that the Iranians were in Pakistan and were giving away everything, and the US will go to Iran and take the uranium. And then he said, I extend the ceasefire for the sake of the Pakistani president. It's obvious that he will eventually take his warships back and nothing will happen. We will win, rest assured.
We should know where we stand. Is it going to be either a ceasefire, peace, or is the war going to continue? The way things currently are, one doesn't know what to do.
Trump is very moody. We shouldn't care about what he says. We should know what we're going to do. Our officials should tell the people what they plan to do. We keep opening and closing the Strait of Hormuz. They've seized one of our ships and they're enforcing a blockade.
All right, just stay with us, Ali. I want to bring Mike Hanna into the conversation. He's live for us at the White House. Mike, Donald Trump says the U.S. will still maintain that naval blockade of Iranian ports, but they're now waiting for Iran to come back with a response. What are you hearing at this hour from the White House?
Well, President Trump has written on his social media, making very clear that opening the Strait or the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is a central part of what he is doing now. He said that this is costing the Iranians $500 million a day. And he believes, obviously, that this is some kind of leverage that he will continue to exercise. But he and his national security team spent hours in the White House behind me here yesterday afternoon discussing what to do. And all indicate it was only when he announced an extension of the ceasefire that everybody knew exactly what was going to happen next. Well, at the moment. So very, very difficult for the Trump administration in the situation it is now. Analysts have contended that the administration has in fact backed down by extending the ceasefire. President Trump himself denies this explicitly. He said repeatedly that the U.S. has already won the war, but he does appear intent on giving space to get some kind of talks together so that eventually he's got an off-ramp from this conflict and get back to what
Ali Hashim, let me ask you about another aspect to all of this. Donald Trump had previously said that the U.S. was negotiating with people in Iran that he had called reasonable. Now he's indicating that part of the problem that the U.S. is facing is that Iran's leadership is fractured. Do we know who's providing the response from Iran to the U.S. right now?
Well, according to the workflow, it should be the foreign ministry, Iranian foreign ministry, and officials from the Supreme National Security Council convening with officials around the country. I mean, different institutions, different layers. I don't see anything that's changed in Iran. I And this is something that we've been repeating over the past weeks. The assassination of the Supreme Leader came with a new Supreme Leader. There was no vacuum in the country, and then the whole system the vacuums within the system were filled. When Ali Larijani was killed, Hamad Bakr Dhul Qadr was appointed in his place. The only thing that's different right now is that the new team that is ruling Iran, the leadership and people around this leadership enjoy more harmony than the one before. And the fact is that there is a consensus. We can see that, at least from our discussions with Iranian officials and Iranian analysts. There is a kind of a consensus within the system in Iran on not going to the negotiations while the blockade is there. So there's nothing from the Iranian side. I think the messaging from the Iranian side was clear that they're not going to negotiations without the blockade being lifted. The problem is that how things are being portrayed to President Trump, that there is the president, because we read several reports yesterday, for example, that the officials in Iran aren't capable of reaching to the Supreme Leader. Or I think that this is a parallel world.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim live for us with all the latest in Tehran. Ali, thanks so much for breaking that all down for us. Well, back now to Mike Hanna, who's standing by for us at the White House. Mike, look, we know that this is an unpopular war in the United States. I want to ask you for a moment about the domestic politics side in all of this. Pretty much in poll after poll across the board, Americans seem to be frustrated when it comes to the messaging about this war and the impact that it might be having, especially when it comes to gas prices in the United States. How much political pressure is Donald Trump under right now?
Well, you mentioned it's an unpopular war, and it's gaining in unpopularity every single day that this war continues. There is an economic consequence on the citizens of the U.S. It's not just at the gas stations where they're seeing the price of gas increase. It's also the cost of daily food, which has been driven up because of the rising costs in transport prices, in particular in the cost of diesel. So there are major political ramifications for President Trump. But one would expect him to be laser focused in this ongoing conflict, but he has just released a social media post lambasting the U.S. Supreme Court in very vituperative terms. So he's clearly very angry from the tone of that particular attack on the U.S. Supreme Court. And the question is, how focused is he on this conflict? And is it perhaps that he's now looking at domestic issues like the behavior of the Supreme Court as a way to indicate that he wants to put the entire conflict behind him? He wants an off-ramp. He wants it to end so he can get on with attacking the U.S. Supreme Court or indeed attempting to win the midterm elections.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna live for us at the White House. Mike, thanks so much for unpacking that all for us. As we've been reporting, a total of 3 cargo ships were attacked by Iran on Wednesday in the Strait of Hormuz. 2 of them were seized. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Office says one attack targeted an outbound vessel off the Iranian coast that's believed to be the MSC Francesca. In an earlier attack, an Iranian gunboat opened fire on a container ship northeast of Oman, heavily damaging the vessel's bridge. Well, let's cross now to Zain Basrabi, who's live for us in Dubai. Zain, good to see you. Look, this ceasefire might be extended, but there's still violence in the Strait of Hormuz. Where does this leave Gulf nations in the bigger picture right now?
Well, as long as there isn't violence in the skies over the GCC countries, as long as there isn't bombardment of targets inside the GCC, I can tell you that the GCC countries will find this status quo not perfect, but better than the alternative of a return to open conflict that saw them come under retaliatory attack by Iran. So as long as the skies and the air warfare, that side of the conflict remains static, things are okay, the status quo is acceptable for now. But as long as the violence in the Strait of Hormuz, as long as that naval conflict remains dynamic, there still remains admittedly a major existential crisis to GCC security and stability, to the country's economies, and to getting back on track, reopening airspace, normalizing airport hub travel and transit flights, getting tourists back, getting residents to return. All of this hinges on maintaining security stability, and as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains in that way, and economic stability, as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains closed and there isn't that normal maritime activity of cargo vessels, of oil and gas, then that remains an existential problem for the GCC. Let's just take a look at some of those ships that we were talking about. One of them was, again, 3 ships that were attacked, 2 seized. One seems to be in the Gulf of Oman now, according to tracking data. One was coming from Dammam in Saudi Arabia on its way to a port in Sri Lanka. The second one was coming from the port of Jebel Ali in the UAE and was headed to the port of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And the third one was also from Jebel Ali, and its route was taking it to, I'm sorry, that was the one going to the port of Jeddah. The one that was seized, the second one that was seized, apologies, let me correct myself, that was going from Jebel Ali to a port in India. So what we are seeing is that these important, vital transit pathways in the Strait of Hormuz that are elemental to GCC economies, those are effectively blocked. And as long as that threat remains, the existential crisis to the GCC will carry on. But again, we have to restate that the status quo now is that there is violence in the Strait of Hormuz. The naval conflict is continuing. But that ceasefire announcement by Donald Trump, there would have been a sigh of relief knowing that the aerial bombardment was unlikely to begin once again.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Zain Basrawi live for us in Dubai. Thanks so much, Zain. 3,000 containers of goods destined for Iran have ended up stranded in Pakistan as a direct result of the U.S. naval blockade. Osama bin Javaid is live for us in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. Osama, just talk us through, if you could, the situation with this cargo that's become stuck in Pakistan.
Well, Mohammed, we've been investigating on the impact of this naval blockade and the situation in the Strait of Hormuz in the last few days. What we've been shown are documents from the Iranian Chamber of Commerce seeking help to get these 3,000 containers which have been stranded in Karachi's ports as transshipment. They were destined for Iran. They couldn't go there, so they were offloaded in Karachi. Now, we suspect that there's going to be a land route that is being discussed with Pakistani authorities where these containers would be taken overland by Pakistani trucks to the border, and from the border they'll be taken by Iranian trucks and lorries. But what we have been able to ascertain is that Iran has established a toll booth on the Strait of Hormuz, which is it is charging in yuan accounts with China, and also in cryptocurrency, as maritime experts and shipping industry has told us. And there's a tier system in that. It is charging about $1 per barrel of oil. So a ship carrying millions of barrels of oil would give millions of dollars to the Iranians. And vice versa, if there is a ship that is carrying cargo, that money would be determined on the value of oil barrels. So it appears that this is something that was working for Iran, but now the Americans have found essentially how to choke that supply. The U.S. blockade has been effective. They've seen dozens of ships that they say they have stopped, but they have also not been able to stop every single ship. And that's what industry experts are saying to us, that this is something which is more of a pressure point on Iran than the actual conflict itself.
And Osama, what are the overall consequences of this transit disruption, both for Iran and regionally?
Well, you've seen the impact on the energy market. I mean, 20% of the global energy supplies are stranded because Iran is not allowing them to go through. That tier system that Iran has established, some countries like Pakistan and Malaysia are able to go for free. Others, including China, have to pay the toll, and that is adding to the cost. And on top of that, there is the U.S. blockade. So all in all, what this means is that there is now a toll booth that has been set up on the Strait of Hormuz, which is blocking supplies going into the Gulf nations, as well as their very important, precious millions of dollars worth of cargoes. But it also means that now the United States has also found its own solution to pressurize Iran, because Iran is heavily dependent on the imports, whether it's agriculture or medicine or raw materials or chemicals that it needs for its industries to function. And the United States is now holding that back. So it appears that this crisis is escalating. We've been speaking to maritime experts and naval experts who tell us that this is not feasible to carry on in the long run, and they'll have to come to some sort of solution. And that is why it is giving people some hope that as this becomes the choke point and the point on which the talks are not progressing further, but can also become a solution where the United States and Iran could come up with some sort of a joint strategy on the Strait of Hormuz rather than free passage that existed before the US-Israeli attacks.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed, live for us from the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. Osama, thanks so much for unpacking all of that for us. Well, here to discuss all these developments, we have Maliha Lodi, a diplomat and political scientist who previously served as Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S. She joins us live from Islamabad. And with me on set here is Muhannad Saloom. He's an assistant professor of international politics and security at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank you both so much for being with us. Professor Saloom, let me start with you. So we have the situation now where there is an extension of the ceasefire. That was announced by Donald Trump. He said that he was now going to be waiting for a response from Iran. But then you also have hours later the news that Iran seized 2 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, that they attacked other vessels, potentially firing on a third. What does that say to you about where we are at this stage? And in the bigger picture, the prospect for potentially more talks taking place in Islamabad?
Well, both sides is signaling to the other that we will only go to these negotiations when we feel we are strong enough and when we feel that we can get something out of it. The United States, because what happened in the Strait of Hormuz from the Iranian side, it was a response, at least this is how they framed it, to what the U.S. did to their vessel a day or two before. And so they are saying that we still have the capacity to respond with force if needs be, and that we will only go to Pakistan or to Islamabad when we feel that the U.S. is willing to give us some concessions in return for what we are willing to do or give up. And I think this will take some time. Both sides each side is betting on time, and I think they believe that time is in their favor.
Ambassador Lodi, Donald Trump has said that this ceasefire extension came following a request from Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Could you just walk us through the kind of intensive 11th hour diplomacy that they must have been involved in to get this outcome that we've come to now?
Well, obviously, when it was clear that the ceasefire was about to expire, and it seemed that the two sides had not agreed to come to Islamabad for the talks, although it was touch and go at one point. So it was imperative for the mediator, and Pakistan remains the sole mediator, to contact the White House, which it did. Our top leadership did that, asking and urging for the ceasefire to be extended, and then hoping that ceasefire created the necessary window for the diplomatic option to be pursued. So that's exactly how it happened. And then, of course, conversations with the authorities in Tehran to see how they responded to the ceasefire. But I think, officials here were really very, very anxious to ensure that the two countries do not go back to the brink, as it were, of war, and that somehow time is found and space is found for the two to at least take a step back and see when they could possibly send their delegations for talks in Islamabad. The talks are not dead, clearly. There is still hope that both countries will show the kind of flexibility because both have an interest in a negotiated end to this war.
Professor Saloom, Ambassador Lodi there says that there is still hope, that these talks are not dead. I want to ask you about the fact that in order for talks to be successful, there must be trust built between these parties. And there is no trust at this point. We know that. We've heard that repeatedly from Iran. We've heard that from the U.S. From your vantage point, how much has the mixed messaging, especially coming from the U.S. when it comes to the objectives, how much has that been detrimental when it comes to trying to continue these talks?
I think I agree with the ambassador that the talks are not dead yet, and I think they will continue to be alive, whether it's in Islamabad or go somewhere else. But the United States itself, I don't think they need also trust in that sense. They need guarantors, I think, and that's on the side of Iran and on the side of the U.S. I think what is the next step is what is the mechanism that both parties would feel comfortable with to move forward. This trust building will take some time from each side in terms of the implementation of any deal that would come through. Let's not forget what happened with the Obama administration, how long it took for that deal to be implemented. years, over a decade to do that. And the U.S. has already broken that trust with Iran. They attacked them. This is not any negotiations under, peaceful time. This is the negotiations under fire. And so what we are looking at here is the U.S. trying to impose its will by force. They couldn't, do that successfully, and now they have to come back to negotiations with Iran, with the upper hand on the U.S. side, but also Iran is signaling that they could prolong this much, much more longer and inflict pain not only on the U.S., but also on the international economy and GCC countries.
Ambassador Lodi, Professor Saloom, they're saying that there needs to be a mechanism going forward. There needs to be guarantors. I want to ask you, from your opinion, watching all this play out, as difficult as this all remains and tense at this stage, we know that the gaps are still wide. Iran wants to see that blockade that's been imposed by the U.S. on Iranian ports. They want to see that lifted. The U.S. is adamant that they're not going to do that at this stage. Is there any gesture that could be made from either of the parties that could get us past this deadlock?
I think at this point it looks very difficult, because unless and until both sides, and remember, neither side has rejected the talks. The Iranians have said that we have a precondition, but they've not rejected the talks themselves. So I think it's hard to sort of say that one single gesture can somehow be a game changer. I think the two will have to come to the realization that to continue dialogue is in their interests, and that going back to war is not a desirable option for either country. I think the challenge is right now that neither side wants to give an impression that the other has the upper hand in the negotiation. So in other words, neither side wants to give a win, as it were, to the other side, which can then be used in the negotiations to drive a harder bargain.
Professor Saloom, I want to ask you where you think things stand when it comes to the region right now, and especially the Gulf countries. We've heard them repeatedly call for de-escalation, and we know there is a lot of concern. Where do you see things sitting when it comes to the levels of concern from the Gulf countries in the region right now?
Gulf countries do not have one position on this. They're divided, but the overall, I think, consensus is that we want this war to end permanently, not only through the ceasefire, and also we need to see a proper end to this war that would make sure that this war would not come back again and would not threaten the GCC. Let's not forget that this war was mostly fought over the land of GCC countries. And the GCC countries themselves, they absorbed most of the damage coming from the war, including Iran as well. Iran is a party to this war, but the GCC countries are not. So what they want is basically to push the United States for a permanent ceasefire, for a proper mechanism to end this war, and also make sure that Iran would not attack them again, because that is unsustainable. Not only the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, but the fact that Iran now found a way it thinks it worked to pressure the U.S. by attacking GCC countries. So the overall there is a lot of concern, but they're waiting for both parties to come to some kind of agreement, and then I'm sure that they will try to pressure both sides to make sure that GCC countries' security is guaranteed.
All right, we're going to have to leave the conversation there. I want to thank both our guests for being with us. Maleeh Halohi, a diplomat and political scientist who previously served as Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S., and Muhannad Saloom, assistant professor of international politics and security at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank you both so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, some developing news out of Lebanon now. The Israeli military has carried out an attack on a car with 2 journalists in southern Lebanon. They had been reporting on an earlier attack by Israel. Let's speak now to Heidi Pett, who's in Tyre in southern Lebanon. Heidi, just tell us more about what you know as to what has transpired so far.
Yeah, so these are 2 local journalists from the newspaper Al Akhbar. Their names are Amal Khalil and Zainab Faitri. And they were on their way to the site of a previous Israeli attack on a car near the town of El Tiri. Now, that attack reportedly killed 2 people who local reports described as civilians. And then when these 2 local journalists went to the scene of that attack to report on it, to gather some more information from the scene, they were then pinned down and surrounded by further Israeli strikes. They were reportedly trapped at the site for more than an hour with teams trying to reach them. Their car was damaged. They weren't able to get out on their own. Now, we understand that the Red Cross is making an attempt to reach them at this time. One of them is reported to be lightly injured. We don't have a great deal more confirmed information about it at the moment. But the Information Minister here, Paul Morkos, he has condemned this attack. He's calling on UNIFIL, that's the United Nations peacekeepers here, and other international bodies to do what they can to assist them. And he's condemned this Israeli attack on journalists once again here in southern Lebanon. Now, this is not the only Israeli military activity that has been ongoing in the south. Over the course of today, there has been multiple demolitions. There is another drone strike in southern Lebanon, which has killed one person and reportedly injured 3 others. There has been artillery shelling in multiple towns. We heard a warplane in what sounded like an airstrike here in the city of Tyre earlier today. And this is all in the context of what is supposed to be a ceasefire. We are smack bang in the middle of what was supposed to be a 10-day ceasefire here in southern Lebanon. But that ceasefire was violated, according to a Lebanese government agency, the National Center for Natural Disasters and Emergency Response, more than 220 times in just the first 3 days of that ceasefire. So it gives you some indication of the ongoing drumbeat of Israeli military activity down here in the south.
All right, that's Heidi Pett live for us from Tyre in southern Lebanon. Heidi, thanks so much. You're watching Al Jazeera. Here's a reminder of our top stories this hour. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has seized 2 cargo ships, the MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas, in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran accuses the vessels of operating without authorization and manipulating navigation systems. The U.S.-Iran ceasefire has been extended to give the sides more time to try and reach a peace deal. Washington says its naval blockade will continue, but Tehran warns talks won't happen until the blockade ends. Hezbollah has claimed an attack against Israeli troops who are occupying territory in southern Lebanon. They launched drones at their positions in Bayada. Hezbollah started attacking Israeli targets on Tuesday, accusing them of multiple ceasefire violations. Zaina Khoda reports from southern Lebanon.
The only sound we can hear is the buzz of an Israeli drone. The streets are empty. There's still a sense of insecurity. A temporary ceasefire came into force last week after 46 days of conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. But there have been multiple violations.
We are in Faruman. It is among the villages that lie just north of the so-called yellow line that the Israeli military imposed. It is calling it a new security border.
The Israeli military's map shows a zone several kilometers deep into Lebanon, from which it says it wants free of Hezbollah and weapons.
We can't drive any further. It's dangerous because according to that map, beyond this point falls within the yellow line zone. Israeli troops are a few kilometers from here, mainly in border villages. Israel asserts control by fire.
This is different to during Israel's 18-year occupation of southern Lebanon that ended in 2000. Then, the Israeli army had positions and carried out patrols with local allies, and people lived there. Now, Israel is leveling villages where Shia Muslims live and is not allowing anyone back, declaring at least 50 towns no-go zones. For the Israeli army, it may be the only way to hold ground, because during weeks of fighting, Hezbollah prevented invading troops from establishing permanent positions.
Hezbollah relied on guerrilla-style tactics that it used in the 1980s and 90s. Those near-daily attacks and ambushes eventually led to Israel's withdrawal. Decades later, the group is pledging to break any military boundary Israel tries to impose.
Abu Ali shows us where the Israeli military was stationed during that occupation. At the time, he returned to his village, thinking the presence of the Lebanese army nearby would keep him safe.
I was shot in my leg while I was planting onions. Why? They don't want us here. But this is our land, and we won't leave.
By Israel's own admission, Hezbollah is still south of the yellow line. It said soldiers engaged with the fighters in recent days. Israel has created a boundary, but this is still contested territory. Zaina Khoda, Al Jazeera, Southern Lebanon.
U.S. markets have opened higher on Wednesday after President Donald Trump announced a truce with Iran would be extended. Wall Street's main indexes, NASDAQ, S&P 500, and Dow Jones, all rose despite the uncertainty over how long the ceasefire will last and whether there will be a peace deal. Well, let's cross live now to Kristen Salumi, who's at the New York Stock Exchange. So, Kristen, markets are up, but so are oil prices. Brent crude is now past $100 a barrel, and that means higher prices at the pump. What more can you tell us?
Well, we're seeing markets respond favorably to the news of an extended ceasefire, but the timeline for those talks remains very unclear. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and as you said, oil prices remain high and are getting higher. And of course, all of that remains a concern for not only average Americans, but also the markets. That said, we saw all of the major indexes sink as the ceasefire deadline approached, worried about what would happen, but then recovered quite quickly. Again, as you mentioned, all three of the major indexes trading in positive territory today. This after the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ hit record highs last week. They've really been buoyed by remarkably strong earnings reports in the first quarter of the year. Many credit this to AI and AI efficiencies. But we are also seeing signs of strain in the markets as a result of this conflict, certainly around oil prices. Alaskan Air Group yesterday canceled its profits for the year as a result of rising oil costs to them, saying that the increase would eat into their profits. Other airlines rearranging their schedule to accommodate those higher costs as well. Delta, United seeing strains in their stocks today. Again, a sign that these rising oil prices are a concern, as oil reserves in the United States are now much lower as the prices continue to rise. But for today, markets positive, but again, the same mantra of the longer this continues, the more the pressures will be on the economy and the American people.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi live for us outside the New York Stock Exchange. Kristen, thank you so much. Lufthansa, one of Europe's biggest airlines, has cut 20,000 short-haul flights to save on fuel costs. It's another consequence of the energy shock caused by disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. The surge in prices will top the agenda at a European Union summit in Cyprus on Thursday. The country currently holds the EU presidency. The Cypriot transport minister has said the bloc may face short-term issues in fuel supplies. Just days ago, the head of the International Energy Agency warned Europe only had 6 weeks of jet fuel supplies remaining. The EU is also seeking to get more energy from renewables, as Rory Challens reports from Cyprus.
It's probably no surprise to anyone that this is exactly the sort of thing the European Union wants to see more of. I'm at a wind farm in Cyprus. For years, the EU has been trying to wean this continent off fossil fuels, replacing them with low-carbon options. Now, especially, the European Commission's new proposals are designed to help countries cope with the energy crisis from Iran's war. But they're not going big guns, though. No windfall taxes or price caps like after Russia invaded Ukraine. What they're doing is allowing countries to drop tax rates on energy by changing Europe's minimum rate rules, and also changing the balance so that electricity is always taxed lower than fossil fuels. Plus, there'll be emergency guidance on how to deal with any jet fuel shortages. So why nothing more flashy? Well, there is a limit to how much Brussels can actually do. It's national governments that control many of the crisis levers, but it's a strategic calculation too. Keep back some of the more extreme measures in case things get a lot worse. There is a wrinkle in the plan, though, and Cyprus highlights it. This is the most oil-dependent economy in the EU. 86% of its power comes from this stuff. So it's all very well pushing electricity, but what if that electricity comes from oil and gas anyway? Now, the EU's pushback to that, though, is that it doesn't. Cyprus is an anomaly. Across the bloc last year, 71% of the EU's electricity came from low-carbon sources. So the argument is, even if there is still some oil and gas in the electricity mix, overall, the pain from energy shocks will be lower. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera in Cyprus.
Well, as we've been reporting, the U.S. is using a naval blockade to pressure Iran into reaching a peace deal. It's a huge blow to its economy and global oil supplies. As analysts warn, it could threaten energy security in Asia. Jalid Agar explains how the measure is being implemented.
Washington has extended a temporary ceasefire with Tehran, but says its naval blockade of Iranian ports and shipping routes near the Strait of Hormuz will continue. It's enforcing that through what's called a distant blockade. Now, the exact location of U.S. forces is unknown, but they're likely positioned around the Gulf of Oman rather than near the Iranian coast. And this reduces the risk they'll be hit by Iranian missile and drone attacks. The blockade affects Iran's main ports, including Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, and Karg Island. Tehran's primary exports are energy and petrochemical products, as well as agricultural goods. It's a huge blow to Iran's economy, which relies heavily on maritime trade. Around 90% of Iran's annual trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and most of that revenue comes from oil. This means the blockade also has major implications for Iran's top customers, including China, the destination for around 90% of Iran's crude exports. Other critical trade partners include the United Arab Emirates, India, Turkey, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Now, the US has followed through on its threats to board and seize any vessel defying its blockade. You're looking at footage released by the US military showing its forces intercepting an Iranian container ship on Sunday. The Tuska was traveling from Malaysia towards the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, as seen here on marinetraffic.com. It's been accused of ignoring hours of warnings for it to stop in the Gulf of Oman. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has warned the US blockade is an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire, warning Tehran knows how to, quote, neutralize restrictions and defend its interests.
Well, let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines at this hour. A massive fire is still raging at Russia's Tuapse oil refinery after it was struck by a Ukrainian drone. The Black Sea oil facility sells most of its products for export, producing some 240,000 barrels of oil per day before it had to be shut down. The region's crucial tourism sector is also set to be badly affected. Al Jazeera's Yulia Shapovalova joins us live from Tuapse. Yulia, we can see those fires still raging behind you. Just tell us more about what's happening where you are right now.
Well, you're absolutely right. As you can see, we are in the city of Tuapse on the Black Sea, and the most significant part of the city is, of course, the oil refinery, which is right behind me, and the port from where the, Russia's crude oil and petroleum products are exported. So these oil processing and export facilities have been indeed attacked lately by Ukrainian drones. The latest attack was last Monday, April the 20th. The fire has been raging for several days since then, and also an oil spill which can be spotted by satellites measuring 10,000 square meters has formed actually not far away from here, not far away from the port. So there is a very big environmental problem, of course. Now the whole area, the sea, the air, the ground, all have been polluted, and you can't see it, but our clothes are covered in tiny black spots, and so are the hair and the skin. Residents call it the oil rain. Authorities actually recommend staying indoors and using masks and other protective gear. Therefore, the city is pretty isolated right now with absolutely empty streets. Apart from these very significant oil facilities which employ thousands of people here, tourism, of course, is also a very big source of income for many people here. In Soviet times, many enterprises scattered throughout the USSR had resorts in Tuapse for their employees to come over and restore their health here. Now the start of the holiday season is weeks away and seems like it is at risk due to the environmental concerns and due to safety concerns as Ukrainian drone attacks are likely to continue here. So people are very much alarmed and anxious. They do not want to talk about the situation, and they do not want any kind of publicity because they are really afraid that no tourists will come over to Tuapse to spend their vacation here. So it means that they will be left without any money.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Yulia Shapovalova joining us live with all the latest from Tuapse. Yulia, thanks so much for that update. Oil has started flowing from a critical Russian pipeline through Ukraine and on to Europe. And Brussels has unblocked a loan for Kyiv worth almost $106 billion. Hungary and Slovakia depend on the Druzhba pipeline and had accused Ukraine of stalling repairs after a Russian drone strike. But Kyiv denied that. The pipeline has resumed operation days after a pro-European candidate unseated Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Hungary. The EU has also given a preliminary green light to the 20th package of sanctions against Russia, expected to be adopted on Thursday. Well, Audrey McAlpine joins us now live from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Audrey, what else do we know at this stage about the approval of that loan and this new package of sanctions against Russia?
Well, oil began flowing through the Druzhba pipeline this morning, and with it, the EU has approved, it appears, a preliminary approval, at least, of the sanctions package as well as the loan. Now, the loan itself, it covers important both domestic spending needs for Ukraine and military. Domestically, it covers education, healthcare, social and civil services. And for its military spending, while Ukraine has a lot of its smaller arms domestically produced, it requires this money for things, more sophisticated weaponry like its air defense. Now, the sanctions package, this 20th sanctions package, which was meant to be unveiled on the 4-year anniversary in February, this will cover things, it will close loopholes, of, for example, microchips that Russia uses in some of its weaponry. It will also close loopholes with banking and financing with Russia, as well as closing some of those that regard oil and gas and energy exports.
And Audrey, this is all connected to the resumption of operations of the Druzhba pipeline, is it not? What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, all of these issues have become somewhat intertwined. In January, after an alleged attack on the Druzhba pipeline, which damaged it, the oil stopped flowing through it. Now, Hungary and Slovakia get the majority of their oil through the Druzhba pipeline from Russia. And so, therefore, they then blocked the 90 billion euro loan that was meant to go to Ukraine, as well as the sanctions package, claiming that Ukraine was intentionally stalling the repair of this pipeline. So there's been a sort of standoff between all three of these issues. And what we saw earlier today, oil has now begun flowing through it, and with it, this loan has received a preliminary approval, as has the sanction package, and they will be signed tomorrow in Cyprus from EU leaders. So really, we see how directly linked these three issues have become and now have been equally resolved.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Audrey McAlpine live for us from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Audrey, thank you so much. Somalia is facing a rapidly worsening hunger crisis. About 6.5 million people don't have enough to eat. 4 failed rainy seasons have exhausted reserves in several regions. The figure includes more than 2 million people already facing emergency levels of hunger. The worst affected areas include northern and central Somalia, along with parts of the south, including the Juba region. Catherine Soy reports from near Kismayo.
You don't need to go far from Kismayo to find this, a graveyard of livestock killed during seasons of drought in Somalia. A resident tells us she lost 200 cattle, only 4 remain. A short drive away, the largest camp for displaced people who have nothing to eat. They've come from areas across Jubaland. The region is hosting more than 500,000 Somalis who have fled drought, floods, and conflicts. Barwako Aiden arrived a week ago. Her 8-month-old daughter, Fardun, is malnourished and has been hospitalized.
Since I arrived, I have not received anything. I'm in the same situation I was in back home.
Some of those in this camp have come from areas controlled by the armed group Al-Shabaab. Hodan Muhammad arrived exhausted. It took her 7 days to get here. She walked part of the way and crossed the river Juba by boat. Hoda and her family have just been registered so they are able to receive humanitarian assistance. But that aid is not coming in fast enough. She's currently living with a sister who came earlier, but the situation is quite dire because they do not have much. They don't have water or food. There are several children that they have to take care of, and the situation is playing out all across this camp. Somalia's crisis is not easing. Climate change, aid cuts, and now the Iran conflict disrupting trade routes have made things worse. Aid workers and the government are struggling to respond.
There is no assistance on the horizon. Nothing we are expecting as of today. I don't know tomorrow. Allah knows what will happen tomorrow. But there is no sight of any assistance from any quarter or from any humanitarian actor.
Bad news for the displaced who must find a way to survive. Catherine Soy, Luglo, Jubaland State, southern Somalia.
Israel's war on Gaza has killed at least 20,000 children. And despite a ceasefire that took effect in October, the number continues to rise. The war has also stopped Palestinian women from carrying pregnancies to term. At the height of Israel's bombing, live births fell by more than 30%. The numbers recovered slightly last year, but births still remained well below pre-war levels. In 2025, the rate of stillbirths had increased by 140% compared with 2022. And cases of congenital anomalies doubled in that same period. In a neonatal unit in Khan Yunis, newborn babies are fighting to survive. Doctors say a growing number of cases may be linked to the harsh conditions of war, where shortages of food, clean water, and a collapsed healthcare system are taking a devastating toll on the most vulnerable. Ibrahim Al-Khalili reports from Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza.
Ahmed is just 2 weeks old, and he's showing signs of a buildup of fluid on his brain. Today, he's sharing the unit in Khan Yunis with Suhair, who's 2 months old. He was born with multiple deformities affecting his mouth and ears. And this is Osama, also just 2 months. He's got a hole in his heart and enlarged ventricles in his brain. Osama's mother has not left the hospital since he was born.
I became pregnant with him during the war, and the pregnancy was exhausting due to the lack of food. I didn't even have safe drinking water, and I was living in inadequate tents. I delivered him early because of the strain and stress. The doctors explained that his condition is not genetic, as he's my first child, and there's no family history of such conditions.
It's often difficult to determine the exact cause of such anomalies, but health officials say the number of cases they are seeing is unprecedented.
These figures are attributed to 5 main factors. First, widespread hunger. Second, the decline in healthcare services. Third, overcrowding. Fourth, exposure to contaminated drinking water. And fifth, the effects of ongoing airstrikes. Last year, there were also 457 neonatal deaths. That's a 50% increase compared to before the war.
There are 3 babies on this unit struggling with congenital anomalies at the moment. But earlier today, there were 5. Baby Fatma is now fighting for her life in intensive care. And baby Iyal, sadly, passed away. The bombs may have slowed down, but Israel's genocide continues.
Here at Nasser Hospital, doctors tell me with resources severely limited, some babies cannot be treated.
Congenital anomalies vary in severity and form. Some are external and often relatively mild.
However, what concerns us most as physicians are the internal anomalies, particularly those affecting vital organs. These conditions usually occur when the fetus is exposed to certain factors during the first trimester of pregnancy, which is a critical period for organ formation.
These babies may have survived the bombs, but they now face a different struggle: the lingering consequences of war on their fragile bodies. Ibrahim Al-Khalili, Al Jazeera, from Nasser Hospital, Khan Yunis, Gaza, Palestine.
Israeli settlers have attacked a Palestinian home in the occupied West Bank. They torched a house in the town of Beit Imran near Nablus. After lighting the fire, they prevented the family from escaping the flames. At least 8 Palestinians were injured in the attack, including a 1-year-old baby. Also in the occupied West Bank, the Israeli military has raided a funeral for 2 Palestinians in the village of Al-Mughayr. Troops stormed the procession of mourners. The dead were killed on Tuesday when Israeli settlers opened fire on a school near Ramallah. One of the victims was 13 years old. The International Criminal Court has dismissed a bid to throw out a case against former president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. Defense lawyers had argued the court had no jurisdiction over Duterte as the Philippines withdrew from the ICC 8 years ago. He's being prosecuted for suspected extrajudicial killings carried out as part of his government's so-called war on drugs. Taiwan's president has canceled a planned trip to Africa this week after 3 countries withdrew permission for him to fly overhead. President Lai Ching-te was supposed to visit Eswatini, Taiwan's last remaining diplomatic ally in Africa. Without warning, the Seychelles, Mauritius, and Madagascar closed their airspace to him. Taiwan says this was due to pressure from China. Beijing has denied any coercion. China claims Taiwan as its own territory. Survivors of a deadly building fire in Hong Kong have returned to retrieve their belongings. It's been 5 months since the fire ripped through the apartment block, killing 168 people. Many are still demanding justice. Patrick Falk reports from Hong Kong.
When Hong Kong's worst fire in decades broke out in November, Dawes Chung was at work. It's his first time back to salvage his belongings. The photos in the living room are fine, he says. But many other homes were completely ravaged by the blaze.
Why did this tragedy happen? Why did 1,900 households have to suddenly go through something so cruel and heartless? You just find yourself constantly swinging between anger and sadness.
Chung is among the former residents returning to the Wong Fuk court this week under supervision. 168 people were killed in the fire. It took rescuers nearly 2 days to put it out. A hearing into what caused the blaze began in March. The panel's lead lawyer has pinned the blame on human error, including for the failure of most of the fire safety systems at the estate. The independent committee is also looking into the scale of bid rigging by construction firms.
I hope there will be an explanation and give the victims some justice. This wasn't just about 1 family or 2 families. A total of 168 people died. Think about it. All 7 blocks were evacuated. Even if 1 block was only indirectly evacuated, it was still evacuated. But when you think about it, the number of people affected across all 7 blocks is enormous.
Victims' families may not get all the answers they want.
The backlash that followed the fire has made it a sensitive issue for the Hong Kong government. Authorities have vowed to punish anyone who politicizes the tragedy, raising doubts about any challenge to the government response to what happened. Patrick Falk, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
The British Parliament has approved legislation imposing a lifetime ban on buying cigarettes for people born after 2008. Children in the UK who are 17 or younger and anyone born in the future will never be able to legally purchase tobacco. The government says the move is aimed at creating a smoke-free generation. Pope Leo has called on Equatorial Guinea to close the gap between the rich and the poor. He's visiting the nation on the 4th and final leg of his Africa trip. Equatorial Guinea is rich in oil, but more than half of its 2 million people live in poverty. The Pope has held Mass in the eastern city of Mongo. That's where President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Africa's longest-serving leader, is from. The Pope is also set to visit a notorious prison in the city of Bata, drawing attention to human rights abuses.
The motto of my visit is Christ, light of Equatorial Guinea toward a future of hope. And perhaps this is precisely the greatest hunger today. There is a hunger for the future, but for a future filled with hope, which can bring forth a new justice, which can bear fruits of peace and fraternity. The future of Guinea depends on the decisions you make. It is entrusted to your sense of responsibility and to the shared commitment to safeguard the life and dignity of every person.
My colleague Rob Matheson will be here in just a couple of minutes with more on the extended ceasefire between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Stay with us.
The delicate dance that Islamabad is playing right now as it tries to bring the United States and Iran face to face is only intensifying.
What we are seeing here is a shift in the war from open conflict to controlled confrontation.
The siege in itself is an act of war. Now, seizure of an Iranian ship, of course, is an escalation within that act of war.
The foreign minister of Iran exaggerated wildly in a social media post. Our president does that all the time.
Nothing is official until you hear it from us here at the White House, but we feel good about the prospects of a deal.
Who's really holding the cards that can end this war? Now President Donald Trump is looking for an off-ramp. Join me, Steve Clemons, every week where I'll bring you the latest analysis on the global fallout of this conflict. Pull apart fact from fiction and get to the bottom line.
Your weekly take on U.S. politics, The Bottom Line.
We're in a period when the U.S. seems to think that it is ruling the entire world. Well, the rest of the world doesn't see it that way.
Up front on Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Rob Matheson. This is the News Hour live from Doha with continuing news of the ceasefires in Iran and Lebanon. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, Iran seizes 2 vessels and fires on a third for allegedly trying to navigate the Strait of Hormuz without authorization.
We should know where we stand. Is it going to be either a ceasefire, peace, or is the war going to continue? The way things currently are, one doesn't know what to do.
Iranians question the future of the peace process after Donald Trump extends a truce in the 11th hour.
To my knowledge, this is a foreign-flagged container ship.
China denies sending anything to Iran after a ship was seized trying to pass the U.S. blockade near the Strait of Hormuz. And no-go zones in South Lebanon. We travel to the Israeli-imposed boundary to see the disruption and the devastation. So Iran's Revolutionary Guard has seized 2 cargo ships and fired on a third in the Strait of Hormuz. State media says the Navy seized the vessels Epimundes and MSC Francesca off the Iranian coast near Sirik. Iran accuses the vessels of operating without authorization and manipulating navigation systems.
These vessels have been transferred to the territorial waters of the Islamic Republic of Iran for inspection of their cargo and documents. The IRGC Navy once again emphasized that any action aimed at disrupting the implementation of the laws announced by the Islamic Republic of Iran regarding transit in the Strait of Hormuz, as well as activities contrary to safe passage in this strategic waterway, will be continuously monitored by the IRGC Navy, and violators will face decisive and lawful action.
Well, meanwhile, the fragile ceasefire between the U.S., Israel and Iran has been extended, even though efforts to reach a peace deal have stalled. President Donald Trump says Pakistani mediators asked the U.S. to hold off on attacking Iran so Iranian leaders can submit a unified proposal. Iran's ambassador to the UN says talks are going to resume as soon as the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports ends. But Washington has said the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is going to continue until a final peace deal is agreed. Now, in a moment, we're going to hear from our correspondents in Islamabad and at the White House in Washington, D.C. But we're going to go to Ali Hashem in Tehran, first of all. So the ceasefire has been extended. Iran has seized 2 ships. How are people in Iran feeling about all of this, Ali?
Well, in general, what we are witnessing these days, especially after yesterday's ceasefire, in a way, the war in people's eyes has come to an end, relatively. However, it's still there. It's still going on. Its impact is still there by the blockade, by the war narrative and rhetoric that is already going on. So the fact is that when people are dealing right now with this situation of no war, no peace, their life is stuck, it's stalled. And that's why there's a lot of concern that this will continue and prolong, especially with no sanction relief, with no drastic solutions to dire problems that they've been going through and suffering from for the past years. So it's a war that already went on, more losses for the country, still sanctions going on, now a blockade. So yeah, it's a lot complicated for the people.
Mr. Trump unilaterally extended the ceasefire, while until just a couple of hours before he said, "I wouldn't extend it, and I'd do this and that." He falsely claimed that the Iranians were in Pakistan and were giving away everything, and the US will go to Iran and take the uranium. And then he said, "I extend the ceasefire for the sake of the Pakistani president. It's obvious that he will eventually take his warships back and nothing will happen. We will win, rest assured."
We should know where we stand. Is it going to be either a ceasefire, peace, or is the war going to continue? The way things currently are, one doesn't know what to do.
Trump is very moody. We shouldn't care about what he says. We should know what we're going to do. Our officials should tell the people what they plan to do. We keep opening and closing the Strait of Hormuz. They've seized one of our ships and they're enforcing a blockade.
Mike Hanna is joining us now from the White House. So Donald Trump extends the ceasefire. The U.S. blockade stays in place. What are you hearing from the White House?
Well, President Trump continues to maintain that his blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is a leverage in this ongoing imbroglio, saying as well that this is costing Iran a great deal of money and he believes will pull them to the negotiating table. However, it does appear that he has extended the ceasefire for a few days only, according to several sources. But at the same time, it's this game that he has been playing for a long period of time, making the massive threat and then pulling away at the last moment. And analysts see this as part of a pattern, but also indicative of his extreme desire to put this whole conflict behind him, to find some off-ramp to be able to move away from this ongoing conflict and yet not lose face.
Let's go back to Ali Hashem in Tehran. Ali, Iran prepared to wait. We're dealing with two very different styles of negotiation here. The US is very keen to get a quick resolution to this, as Mike was just saying. But as I say, Iran is prepared to wait. What is it going to take, do you think, to get them back to the table?
Well, it's there for the moment that the two sides are talking two different languages, though they have a common ground right now, which is both are in the Sea of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz, blocking passage there. So for the Iranians, they're asking for the blockade to be lifted, for them to go to Pakistan and sit with the American side. And we've heard, we're just seeing now Ismail Baqai, the spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, giving an interview to an international news outlet saying that they are changing their position frequently. He's talking about the Americans. And he points to flip-flops, threats of war crimes, in reference to President Trump's stream of social media posts and interviews over the past days. Also, he says that when Trump threatened to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge if Iran did not accept what he called the U.S. offer of a very fair and reasonable deal. So Baqai explains that Iran is not decided yet on whether it's going to attend the peace talks in Pakistan, which is the same stance and position we've been hearing over the past days. So for now, there's nothing changed as far as the blockade is there. Iran's blockade is also in place. And we've heard today about the two ships that Iran seized in the waters. So one Iranian ship seized by the United States, two other ships seized by Iran. We are in a situation of tit for tat, and everyone right now is really concerned that with a fragile ceasefire, this could at any time fire back.
Ali, thanks very much indeed. There's Ali Hashem there talking to us from Tehran. We're going to go back to Mike Hanna in the White House. So Ali was describing there the list of requirements that Iran needs in order to get it back to the table, but was saying that Iran is prepared to wait. Nevertheless, the U.S. is anxious, as you were describing, to get this over and done with. What does the U.S., do you think, need to make this end quickly?
Well, it needs to have some kind of agreement from Iran that will allow President Trump to walk away and declare some kind of victory. He has repeatedly, for a number of weeks now, saying that the U.S. has already won this war. It's all over bar the shouting is what he says, yet he maintains and continues his blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. So the situation very unclear from the Trump administration's point of view. What would they be prepared to accept to get out of this? Because there is no doubt that they do want to get out of this, to put the conflict behind it. President Trump is already looking forward to political consequences, perhaps in the midterm elections. He's also well aware of the polls that have been produced recently, though he continues to deny their veracity, which shows him as probably the most unpopular president in history. And certainly this war is as unpopular as any conflict the U.S. has been engaged in before.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. That's Mike Hanna bringing us up to date there from the White House. 3,000 containers of goods destined for Iran have ended up stranded in Pakistan as a direct result of the U.S. naval blockade. We're going to go to Osama bin Javed in the Pakistani capital. Just talk us through the situation with this cargo that appears to have become stuck in Pakistan.
We've been investigating the movement of ships, cargoes, and energy from the Strait of Hormuz, and we found that there is according to documents that have been shown to Al Jazeera, there is about 3,000 containers who are now stranded on ports in Karachi. These containers were destined for Iran, but because of the situation in Hormuz and the U.S. blockade, are now stranded here. There was expectation that there is going to be a cargo ship which comes from Iran to ferry these back there, but that has not happened because of that blockade. And now we're being told that there is now consultations about perhaps to create a land bridge where these containers will be taken by Pakistani trucks to the Iranian border and will be ferried forward by Iranian trucks. But it just goes to show that how difficult the situation has become, not just in the Strait of Hormuz, but because of the U.S. blockade. Analysts have been telling us that this is perhaps the biggest pressure point that the United States have been able to find to pressure Iran, not just diplomatically and militarily, but now economically, because the Strait of Hormuz, as Iran has been using it as been a lifeline to its revenues. And that is why you're seeing both sides digging their heels and wanting the Iranians wanting the blockade to be lifted, and the Americans saying that unless there is a deal, the blockade is going to stay in place.
Let's expand on the economic impacts of this. What are the consequences for Iran, as you were just mentioning there, but also regionally as well, of this disruption?
Well, during the last few days, we've been able to ascertain that Iran has put in a toll booth on the Strait of Hormuz. It's a multi-tier system when Iranians are charging either in secretive cryptocurrency, or they're setting up yuan accounts, the Chinese currency, where ships are having to pay a toll and they get a code and then they're allowed to pass. What shipping experts and maritime agencies leaders have been telling us is essentially this tier system works where the sides that are closer to Iran, like Pakistan or Malaysia, are trusted and they go for gratis. They're not charged a toll. But countries like even China are charged a toll, which is almost $1 a barrel. So a ship carrying millions of barrels of oil would pay a toll in millions of dollars. And that is why it has become crucial for the United States, not just as a parallel source of the petrodollar system, but also to stop Iranian revenues. For the region, as the Iranians have been able to block almost a fifth of the world's energy supplies, this U.S. blockade is having a real impact as well. From industry experts, we believe that the blockade has not been able to stop all the ships, but has been able to create enough impact for the Iranians to take note. And unless this comes to some sort of an agreement, the entire economy of the region is going to function, because it is not just oil exports coming from the Middle East, it's also goods and other supplies that are going into Iran and other parts as well. And that is why some industry experts are hoping that because it has become such a sticking point, this could pave way for a deal where the United States and Iran could come to some sort of an agreement where they jointly man how the Strait of Hormuz is run. Clearly not the way it was before the Israeli-US strikes on Iran.
Osama bin Javed in Islamabad, thank you very much indeed. Well, Donald Trump's accused China of secretly assisting Iran. That's after U.S. forces intercepted a ship carrying what he described as a gift from Beijing. China denies the accusation and insists that it remains neutral. But the spat could strain ties ahead of Trump's planned visit. Katrina Yu reports from Beijing.
In one of the most serious accusations yet, President Donald Trump says the U.S. intercepted a ship headed for Iran, carrying what he described as a gift from China. He didn't say what was on board, but told American media it was something not very nice.
I was a little surprised, but because I have a very good relationship, and I thought I had an understanding with President Xi, but that's all right. That's the way war goes, right?
China has denied the allegation.
To my knowledge, this is a foreign-flagged container ship. China opposes any malicious links and hype.
In recent days, Beijing has intensified diplomatic efforts to end the war, holding talks with leaders from the Middle East and Europe. It's criticized the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, calling it a dangerous escalation. Before the conflict, about half of China's crude imports were shipped through the Strait of Hormuz, 13% from Iran. China was the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, and those supplies, up to 1.3 million barrels per day, are now disrupted. That stake has raised questions, particularly in the U.S., about how neutral Beijing really is. In a social media post, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said the seized ship was linked to chemical shipments for missiles, and went on, another reminder that China is helping prop up Iran's regime. China's embassy in Washington rejected the accusation, saying it handles military exports prudently and strictly controls dual-use goods.
Chinese officials have been pushing for peace talks and say they support Pakistan's mediation efforts. But they've also been careful to downplay their influence over Iran, saying China